Now, even if you're not a programmer or a developer, let's say in the DevOps world, you're more ops than you are dev, you're going to want to go ahead and get the Cloud SDK from Google, which is the Cloud Software Development Kit. And again, this is going to give you the command line interface to run programs like GCloud and GSUtil, as well as BQ for BigQuery. Now, I'm going to install this on my Windows 10 machine. If you go here, you can see we've got an install for Mac OS, we've got an install for Linux, there's a separate install for Debian and Ubuntu, and a different install for Red Hat and CentOS. And I mentioned in the introduction the advantages of the SDK, but let's go down here. I want to show you a couple of things here. Obviously, you can see all the different areas of the platform that this can be used. Okay, Kubernetes engine, Cloud DNS, Cloud Data Proc, the list goes on. I want you to look at the Google Cloud Client libraries. This will probably be a test question, okay? So you need to know what's supported on Google Cloud. So this is a list of things to remember for the exam, okay? Go, Java, Node.js, Python, Ruby, PHP, and C#. So make sure you remember that list for the exam. That's the Google Cloud Client library list. So we've got to know that. Also, you're going to want to go and look at the documentation, okay? And this will give you an idea of kind of what we're going to do. And obviously, there's a different set of instructions depending upon what your operating system is that you're going to run this, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and download the Cloud SDK installer. I'll go ahead and do that here in real time, okay? It's going to tell you some other things, though, to keep in mind. It requires Python 2 with the release of Python 2.7.9 or later, and it'll install the necessary dependencies, including the Python version by default. If you already have it, you can just uncheck the Install Bundled Python option. It also says that depending on when you're watching this particular video, this may or may not be even showing up here as a note, but just experimental support for running Python 3.4 plus interpreter. After I finish installing, I'm going to accept to start the Cloud SDK shell, and I'm going to run GCloud init. So in that terminal window, I'll run that command, and that'll give me my kind of initialization. One other thing, on Google Compute Engine instances, if you're going to do this, on an instance in the cloud, for example, you're going to use that as a bastion host or a jump host. If it's running Windows Server, IE is set for enhanced security configuration, and this will prevent you from running the installer. So you have to disable the enhanced security configuration first, restart IE, and then run the installer. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's also quick start guides, how-to guides, APIs and references, which has the GCloud CLI reference. On the exam, you're not going to be, burdened with having to memorize a bunch of GCloud CLI commands, but we will, in the next lesson, we'll look at some of the basics, some of the fundamentals to make sure that you're covered for the exam. But you're going to want to take some time on your own to dive in and get as familiar as possible with the GCloud commands and the keywords and the switches and GSUtil as well. And if you're going to use BigQuery, you'll want to dive into BQ. BQ commands won't be on the exam, though. Now, we may see some of those when we get into some demonstrations later on in this training, but don't get hung up on BQ commands, all right? Now, for best results installing the SDK, my advice is to go create a service account first that you actually are going to log in and get authenticated within that service account. We're going to talk more about service accounts later on, but I wanted to show you this now. I'm going to go and I'm going to create a service account name. I'm in the IAM and admin area. I have to choose my project. So I'm choosing my first project here, and then I'm going to go down to service accounts, and then I'm adding a service account, SDK service, ACCT, and then here's the account ID, and you can see it's an account for the GCP SDK. Click on Create. I now want to select a role, and I'm going to choose Project Owner. I want full access to all resources, and then Continue. I need to create a key because I'll need that key when I use the GCloud init for the first time after I download. So I'm going to click on Create Key. I'm going to download a file that has a private key, and you want to store this file securely because you cannot recover it if it's lost. Also, it's, if it's in the wrong hands and this is an owner, I could be in big trouble, right? So I'm going to stick with the JSON recommended and click on Create. I'm going to save the file and close. So let's go up here and I'll click on Cloud SDK Installer. It knows I want to do Windows, so that's what it's going to give me. And so I'm going to save the file, display the progress of my downloads. It's completed, so I'm going to go to my Downloads folder. Here's the Google Cloud SDK installer. Double click on that. I'm not going to send anonymous stats to Google. That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, click on Next. I am going to agree. Typically we should read this, but I'm just going to go ahead and agree to that. I'm a single user. I'm the owner, so I'll click on Next. And I'm going to go ahead and stick with the default destination folder. Click on Next. And this is what I mentioned earlier. Obviously, I'm going to get the Cloud SDK core libraries and tools. I don't have Python or that version running on this system. This is a pretty new build on this workstation. So I'm going to go ahead and do the bundled Python. And I don't want to install the cloud tools for PowerShell because I don't need them. But a lot of you out there, if you're going to be working with, Windows Server instances or Active Directory environments, obviously you want to make sure you have those tools. I'm just going to take them out and click on Install. I'm going to pause while this installs on my system. Okay, so the Google Cloud SDK has been installed. We'll click on Next. Here's some options. Okay, I do want a Start Menu shortcut. I don't want a desktop shortcut. I do want to start the SDK shell, and I also want to run GCloud init to configure the Cloud SDK, right? So we mentioned that that's going to be the next thing we're going to do, so I'll click on Finish. Okay, so I'm running my command.exe as administrator. I'm going to issue the command GCloud auth, and then activate service command, service account that is, followed by key file, and we'll say equals, and I'll paste it in there. And now we have activated service account credentials for my service account in my project. Let's run GCloud init. It says welcome. We're going to go through the configuration of GCloud. You can see the account, a couple of options, pick configuration to use, reinitialize this configuration at default with new settings, or create a new configuration. I'm going to choose one. I want to choose the account I want to use to perform operations. I'm going to choose one. Scroll down here a bit. Notice that I'm logged in as my service account, the one that I created. I'm going to pick my cloud project, which is one. I don't want to configure a default compute region and zone. I'm going to say no. Clear the screen. And let's do one command here just to make sure that we're working fine. GCloud auth list. And there's that service account that we're using. And by the way, you'll run the same command also often when you're doing some of the labs up at quicklabs.com. But we're now ready to use the SDK, and we're ready to use things like GCloud, GSUtil, and BQ, and other things. And we'll take a look at some of those basics and fundamentals. We're going to be using the CLI, we'll be using the Cloud Shell, we'll be using GCloud, we'll be using GSUtil quite a bit. I'm going to be doing a lot of demos after this, demonstration videos. We'll be seeing a lot of these commands. So let's just kind of get our feet wet here. If we issue a GCloud and we do a -- help, that's really where you want to begin if you're kind of brand new to this, okay? So it tells us that GCloud helps us manage Google Cloud Platform resources and developer workflow. So for example, I'll do a Control-C, get to the top. Let me show you this command, GCloud H. You can see that we can follow up GCloud with optional flags, and we'll talk about those. There's a bunch of flags that are available to us. But notice you can also follow up group, and so the group might be, these are services, right? So app group, big table, composer, compute, data store, container, IAM. There's also functions, which is, serverless code, machine learning engine group, pub sub. So you can issue the GCloud command, then a flag, then one of these groups. For example, we could say GCloud compute, and then maybe do a -- help here. It describes what that group is. It shows the cloud-wide flags that you can use. So let's talk about some of those real quick. The account flag, it's the GCP user account that's going to invoke this particular command. Configuration, so what configuration are we going to use to invoke this command? The flags-file, basically a YAML or JSON file that specifies a flag. Format, that's one that's pretty popular. You can set the format for printing command output resources. There's a bunch of supported formats like CSV formatting. There's JSON, there's list, table, text, YAML. Those are all very popular. We've already seen -- help. The project flag is basically the GCP project name that's going to invoke this command. So, for example, in my case, it would be my project. Quiet is a flag that disables all the interactive prompts when you're running the GCloud commands. And verbosity is basically overriding the default verbosity for this command with any of the supported standard levels like debug, info, warning, error, critical, and so on. And so we know that groups, there's a ton of groups here. If I hit the tab key, you can see all these different groups that are showing up, okay? A lot of them, okay? Then a lot of different commands. For example, config secure shell, connect to a serial port. We don't really use copy files anymore. Reset the Windows password, the SCP, secure shell. So just a lot of things to look at. So you want to kind of get, familiar with GCloud. And like I said, we'll be using that quite a bit. There's also GSUtil. You can do GSUtil -- help. Tons of commands here. We're going to be seeing GSUtil quite a bit when we do our demonstrations. It's a Python application that lets us access cloud storage from the command line. We can do a bunch of things on buckets, object management tasks. We can create and delete buckets. We can upload, download, delete objects. We can list buckets and objects. We can move. We can copy. We can rename. We can edit. We can see here's the ACL, okay, the access control list. So we can get, set, or change bucket and or object ACLs. CP, copy files and objects. We're going to definitely see that for sure. IAM, getting, setting, or changing bucket or object IAM permissions. And we can scroll down and see, other things we can do here. And here's additional help topics. Now, if you're going to use this command, GSUtil uses GS:// to designate the resource in cloud storage. So it would basically be GS:// whatever the bucket name is, and then it would be followed by a // and then whatever the object name is. GSUtil help is the main help command that you'll use. And again, you can say help and then follow that up with any of these commands. So if you wanted to see, ACL, you could say GSUtil help ACL or ACL, and you could get information about that particular command. Okay, so like I said, we're going to see these over and over and over the next dozen lessons or so as I go through different demonstrations. So just make sure that you're familiar, especially with GCloud, but also to a lesser extent, understanding how GSUtil is going to help us when we access and manage cloud storage. Okay.